You ready? So if we go back to what these 6 elements of a law school are, so classrooms, clinic, faculty offices, student organization spaces, and support, library, which then also might have related to it as a 6th element, journals and the kind of more professional side of law of the student activities. What would be the ideal organization? Mike, you were just talking about the library, what the future of the library is.
Well, I think that the organization of the building and the position of the library should be carefully discussed, because I think that's one thing that we learn going to ABA conferences over the years. That's always like a focus of these conferences, the discussion about the future of the library, the changing nature of collections. And,
right.
and we found, for example, working at Drexel, which is an institution that was very challenged by the square footage that they had available. They had to make very careful decisions about what they collected and how they provided resources to students. And we did, through the programming process, we did challenge them on their space needs and so forth, went through a very detailed analysis of what they have and what they think they may need to be accommodating in the future. And it's just different than other law schools, and maybe because they are being forced into sort of be the future model because of limited resources. That's kind of my sense, my takeaway from that discussion.
My suggestion these days is that you take the library and you expect it to be decanted at books over time on it, and they'll come down to some essential core hard copy in that. And the rest of the space has got to evolve. It can evolve 2 different ways. You can turn it into internal, more collaborative kinds of spaces for the students in that, or vice versa. You can start to look at it as something that is sort of piecemeal into other parts of the program as the space becomes available. And so it's got to have that kind of flexibility in terms of adjacency. And so what's likely to change right with the library comes to that.
So when you think about that, go back to the UVA model where the library is at the same public floor as the classrooms, that to me makes a certain degree of sense. Because if it's going to evolve and change and maybe turn into something else, turn into more of a teaching space and a place that's a repository for books, I would argue that having it at the kind of lower levels where there's more student activity and more student access makes more sense than putting it way up in the air, which is in fact what we're doing at UP Law, right? We're putting it way up in the air, but we're relying on this atrium, this kind of vertical street to interconnect everything, to mix everything.
Well, one of the things that's beginning to happen is that the things that are taking on more of a personality and a place and need to have a place are the centers and institutes. But because they're reliant on periodic funding, they ebb and flow. But if there's an area that's probably the question as to what it's going to become, that may be the thing you can fix next to the library, so that can move.
And Mike and Mark, talk again about what you were talking about a minute ago about an ideal relationship. If you kind of did an ideal law school of faculty offices to classrooms, how should those two ideally interconnect or not interconnect?
In some models, you end up in a situation where you've got research people who are really focused on their publishing.
Research
faculty and doing collaborative work, not just with faculty there, but increasingly with faculty in other schools. And they need more of an isolation situation on that ability to communicate easily with faculty outside of the office for research. There's the other kind, which is kind of the other wonderful extreme of these two, is that you have those folks that are most devoted to their students as a teaching institution as opposed to a research institution. And that's a point in which they need some buffering, but they need to be intermingled.
So Mark's first space is like Yale, where the faculty are in a ivory tower, disassociated from the classrooms, and the one that's more interrelated, where would be a model where the faculty...
University of Baltimore is a really good example of that, in which there's almost a miscellaneous character to a mixing of library, classrooms, faculty, and student activities, where there is no clear geometric divide between each of those pieces of it. So those represent 2 different models.
Right. When you have a model like that, you have to be focused in the design, I think, on creating a space where you're still encouraging faculty to come to, so they're not isolated up in their tower all the time, but there is a place where they do have that casual interaction with the students outside of the classroom.
Which Rutgers, I think, has proven to be a pretty good example of that, right? Where that
Yeah.
the central lounge, which is really a bridge between faculty and faculty,
Yeah.
becomes a kind of mixing bowl for faculty and students.
Increasingly, that's beginning to happen on a first floor in a traditional site situation. The thing that's interesting about Rutgers is it ended up at the second floor is they're bridging a street, so they've used the community space, which is multi-purpose in that. Multi-purpose isn't quite the right word, but it's variable in how it can be used. It can go all from lounge and eating space for the students and a place for gathering by the faculty to it can become a colloquial space, it can become a conference space, it can become a lecture space, it can become a dance floor for a fundraising event. And so it's got that kind of area quality to it up on that second level.
So in an urban situation like we have here, what would be the most appropriate?
I was going to ask, so for Georgia State, Scott, there's really, I mean, the connection to the law school or to the business school doesn't need to bridge, right? I mean, there's not a street bisecting it, or
Well, we don't know what the desired synergy is between the two. We don't have that information. We can give a certain potential.
There's a lot of different
Michelle, I
ways.
think we can, thanks.
Okay.
Were you able to zoom